Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast. Today, we're going to discuss the culture of Russian Megalopolis. And First of all, I think I should introduce myself and a colleague of mine who is sitting next to me. This is Dr. Olga Simonova. She's engaged in teaching here at High School of Economics, and she's an associate professor. And well, she's a sociologist as well as I am. And well, the focus of her interest, I would say, is a theoretical sociology, sociology of emotions, and also I would suppose she has a special passion for urban studies since she was a person who engaged me to join her today, and I'm very grateful to her for this invitation, and I think we will have a very interesting and discussion, and we will enjoy it, and I hope you are. Okay, and I'm Dmitry Popov. I'm from Russian Academy of Sciences. I'm a leading researcher at Russian Academy of Sciences. And sometimes, from time to time, I'm also engaged in education here at the University High School of Economics. And I'm, well, here teaching at the program Russian Studies, for instance. And by the way, this little lecture we're going to have today is a small, tiny bit of our future course that we will have. I believe this in the next spring or maybe in the late winter here at High School of Economics on the program Russian Studies. And if you are interested in Russian culture, Russian language, and Russian history, and so on and so forth, I would encourage you to join our program and come to Moscow campus. And it would be really great experience, great emotional and functional, and so on and so forth. I believe that you have an opportunity to get a master's diploma on this program, Russian Studies in Political Science. And it would be really great for your career. But anyway, if you are leaning more towards sociology as we are, I would suppose that it would be better for you to enter another program which is called Sociology of Public and Business Sphere. This program, well, there is a little bit of problem here because this program is totally in Russian. But if you are a prominent English speaker, if you are interested, as I said, in Russian culture, we will develop a personal curriculum for you, and you will have a lot of time to travel throughout the cities or throughout the Russia, and it would be a really great experience for you, I believe. So I believe that here in High School of Economics there are some programs for traveling, for foreign students, and also for Russian speaking students. So well, I would recommend you to join. And you will get, by the way, you will get very strong experience and analytical skills in sociology. And also you will get a diploma in sociology, master's diploma in sociology, and then will be really good for your career and your future work. Okay, and now, well, I think I should get back to our main topic, and which is the culture of Russian megalopolis. And I would say that our mutual interest, when I say our, I mean mine and Dr. Simonova interest to the city and the city studies. It's not just a professional interest. It's, well, I would say it's our biographical fact that we are living here at Moscow, in the large globalized city nowadays. And it's a part of our biographies. And so since we're sociologists, we are just engaged in all activities here. And I would say we're doing a participant, so-called participant observation of the city. It's a part of our lives. So it's very interesting for us to have this discussion today, just because, well, it's a question that, well, concerns us in direct way. It's not just a theoretical question. It's a question which we can raise every day of our lives here. Well, and I would start probably with a very small and simple question today. And the question is, what is a city? What is a city? And this question is very really small and simple, but small and simple only in its form. But if you are concerned about the answer, well, I would say there is no simple answer for this question. Because, well, simple answer is just, one answer. There are lots of answers for this question. For instance, for criminologists, city would be an arena where crimes are happened. And for a philologist, it's some environment where language develops and some, well, interesting things happens with their special dialects in a city environment. For an architect, I think you understand that it's a very interesting physical environment, including buildings, including roads, avenues, squares, and so on and so forth. And the architect is planning the city. It's very interesting for him, and he's totally involved in this planning. And for what is the city for sociologists? And this is a very difficult question, I think, because as a sociologist, we're well, usually we're studying the social interactions. But city both is a cultural environment for this interaction, because city is something that artificially constructed by a society. By the society, I would say in this concrete case, since we're talking about Russian megapolis. And from the other hand, it's a structure that guides us in our day-to-day life. And when we're doing something, of course, this action depend on this structure. And this is this dualism in Russian or in any city, actually, not only in Russian city. I think this dualism is very important for our talk today, because, well, this is a different view on one single problem. And another thing that I should say in this, I would say, already prolonged introduction. Now, well, there is a very important focus on transformations, because, the history of Russian life in 20th century, in the beginning, 21st century, it's a history of deep and very, very intensive cultural transformations. And so when we talked before this, lecture today, we were discussing this idea of Russian megapolis. We decided that one of the focuses and one of the ideas that we should bring here to you is that Russian city and Russian megapolis in current state is brought to life through these very important social transformations. And so we will, or at least I will, try to draw these transformations for you and show you how they happened and what are the consequences of these transformations, and why should we count on them when we're studying Russian city. And one more discussion. I'm sorry for this long speech. One more distinction that I would like to bring as an idea for you. Or by the way, you can ask us any questions you like, and please send us comments and your ideas, your questions, and so on and so forth. And so forth, and because we can see these questions on our screen. And so if you're hearing something interesting, please, or uninteresting, please let us know about this. Okay, and back to this distinction I would like to bring to our discussion. It's a distinction of public and private spaces in a city. And well, probably you understand what I'm talking about, but still, I would say a few words about this. Well, the private space, it's well, a space where people live. It's actually, your apartments or dormitories and so on and so forth. This is a place where families inhabit, and in this place, just people inhabit, not just single men and women and so on and so forth. And well, why it's important? Because the logic of development of these private spaces is sometimes is different from the logic of development of public spaces. And I would say that in sociology, there are two very prominent hypotheses or prominent things about this private spheres. I would say that the private, we can see the private, the public spheres, because we can see the public sphere as a marketplace. It's a metaphor. Public sphere as a metaphor of a marketplace. It's a place where all the people can meet and they can, interact. And at the end of this, they form communities. And this is one important thing that we are going to discuss today: how the communities form and how the city produces cohesion for people. And another metaphor which we are using here in sociology is a metaphor of theatrical theme. Theatrical theme is a place where something happens that is of interest to everyone. But people who are doing this, involved in this theatrical performance, they know their roles and do these roles on the street. And this is also very important thing that I think I would return to it later when I would be talking about Russian city and Soviet city and how this city evolved through the history. And now I would like to let my colleague speak, and I would address her one little question about this culture and development of the city. And Olga, what do you think about social stability and transformation? What are the general approaches? And by the way, how we should study culture of a mega city? What do you think? What's your opinion on this?
Yeah. Hello, everybody who joined us. Thank you to all for having us today. And our topic today is the culture of Russian mega city. It is a very tricky question because it's very difficult for me as a sociologist. And I'd like to return to general questions about namely the culture of Russian mega city. The mega cities are defined as a cities with a population greater than 8 million people. And they are not so much as global cities, but they are also emerging in not only quite developed countries, but in less developed countries, and the Russia is one of these countries. And I'd like to outline the general questions and general notions to study, namely the culture of Russian megapolis, and in framework of sociology. And to begin, I'd like to remind you what we mean by culture in sociology. And I should say that we define the culture as the system or configuration of some values, norms, symbolic dimensions of social phenomena, the content of beliefs, representations and expectations, linguistic and symbolic components of social phenomena. In other words, the culture is the combination or configuration of worlds of meaning. And we also should include the material culture, human artifacts, material consequences of human activity. And in course of this general approach to culture, I'd like to outline the difficulties we face up when we think about the culture of megacities like Moscow and St. Petersburg in Russia, mainly, I think so. And I should say that it's very difficult because we can't to apply directly the notion of culture to Russian culture as a whole, and especially to the culture of Russian megacities. And because the paradox is that the megacity is is culturally diverse, extremely culturally diverse, and how we can think about the culture of the megacity as a whole. And I should say here that it is very difficult when we talk about the Russian culture, because first of all, today there is no a single culture in Russia. We have coexistence of or interaction of multiple cultures, ethnic communities, denominations, or on a geographically very huge, extremely huge space, and coexistence of many regions with their own characteristics. And in other words, we have many worlds of meaning in Russia. And but the sociology helps us to try to talk about the culture of megacity in Russia. But the second point is that do we observe the not only can we observe the single culture in Russia, unified culture in Russia, but can we observe the postmodern culture in Russia? It's a very difficult questions, and I should say, with the help of the words of Russian sociologist Boris Dubin, that we have in culture rather the configurations of common communicative ways of life, maybe, or those zones of symbolic life. And the last and considerations is that now in Russian culture there are no outstanding figures or masses of people who made who can make the unified culture of Russia, and so based on these considerations, I'd like to outline the main characteristic of modern Russian culture. And in this list of these characteristics, you can find the features of the Western culture of Western megacities, which you can apply to study the culture of Russian megacities. But this characteristic, I should say, they are very important to understand Russian culture, and you take them in mind when if you think about Russia and the culture of Russian megacity. And our approach, my and Dmitry, we elaborated our own approach to Russian culture, and it is based on the important thought about the Russian history, Russian culture from the point of sociology, and we decided to study the Russian culture from the point of view of comparison two main traditions in the history of Russia. I mean, Soviet or late Soviet tradition, and the tradition that is emerging nowadays. Maybe it is called post-Soviet tradition. And if you take in mind this comparison, maybe we can understand better the culture of contemporary Russia, or the culture of modern Russian cities. And based on all of this I've said, now I'm go to special characteristic of modern Russian culture. They are the following. First of all, I should mention that now in Russia we have no unified collective memory, and all collective memory, especially of the Soviet period, um, is under the wide revision now, and many things have been radically rewritten. And the whole attitude to Russian history and to Russian culture now is under huge and massive doubt. And what was important in Soviet period is now not so important in post-Soviet period, and maybe. But the main notion here is that our collective memory is constructed now around our wars and victories and heroism of Soviet people. And in this sense, I should remind you that the sociological thesis of collective trauma is very useful here, because traumatic stress of these massive transformations in Russia determines the face of the city and the whole Russian culture, because it is important to understand what are the new traditions now, what the attitude to Soviet heritage, and maybe it is reproducing the Soviet heritage, or maybe we now are overcoming this Soviet heritage now. And for example, what I do mean by the traumatic experience, it is the nostalgia for Soviet period. It is widespread mood nowadays, and it is widespread between not only the people who lived in Soviet time, but it is widespread between the people who does not live in the Soviet period. It is paradox. It is very interesting, but this nostalgia for Soviet times quite determines the face of Russian cities and Russian beliefs, and so on and so on. The second point is that now in Russia we have new forms of collectivity. For example, it is the service to great company. For example, we have known these relationships in Soviet period, and for example, new subcultural communities or associations, new associations in new areas, and mixed communities, and for example, online or offline communities, and also we can observe in Russian context a constant or permanent increase of a number of very diverse forms of lifestyles, for example, and we should consider this feature as very important. And the third point is that in Russia, now we can observe the very, mobile, I would say, or very high mobility of professional structure. Um, um, for example, widespread changes of working careers, switching of career orientations, permanent changes in type of activities, freelance, and so on. And all of these, I would say, revitalize the lifestyle of megacity and lifestyles of every human being in megacity. And the fourth feature is, I think it's important that we can observe the loss of motivating force of social mobility now in Russia, because if we mention that extreme mobility of professional structure, we can say that higher education does not guarantee us the social mobility in our stratification. And my favorite one is that now in modern Russian culture we can observe the return to religion as whole, and religiosity, and we can observe the new attitude to religion now in Russia, because many people desire now to believe in God. They choose to believe in God and participate in Eastern Orthodox activities now, and not massively. We have Christian activity, but in other confessional activity. But it's I think it's outstanding feature of Russian culture now. And in our presentation we have, for example, the photo of the new Russian districts. Dmitry, can you show this slide?
Sure.
And yes, when as is a feature that the building, the third building is inseparable from the yes, thank you very much. Inseparable, the building of church from the new regions in Russian megapolis. And I think I should stop here from featuring the Russian culture today. And in conclusion, I think it is important to show you the maybe the style of Russian megacities that make them maybe closer to Western megacities, and maybe you can call them postmodern cities. I can believe in that, and I think at least three points are important here. First of all, it's I think it's the collapse of meta narratives or mega ideologies in Russian culture, and now we have extreme cultural diversity. But in the in the concept, I should mention the great efforts of our state to construct or to create the unified ideology. right? I think it's quite impossible, but we face with these state efforts. And the second point is that rejection, maybe, or the attempts of disenchantment of the world, because we now in Russia can't exist without religion beliefs of religion styles of life. And the last one is that all the previous cultural hierarchy disappears in Russian culture, and now we can study what is emerging now, and I think it is very interesting and very difficult, and maybe it's our future activity to manage such studies, and I hope so that we can reach success in their area. And now I should convey my my role to Dmitry. And what is interesting in this connection with that all I have said, that what are the approaches now in contemporary sociology to think or to research these megacities or megalopolises, and which are the differences between their previous urbanism in sociology and the contemporary postmodern, I would say, urbanism.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And to answer this question, it's actually a very broad question. And to answer it, I would well show you several pictures here. But you know, I would like to stress one thing. I think it's very important because it is well, it was somehow in Professor Simonova's speech that you know, we are sociologists and we do not understand culture like, you know, just ballet or just fine art or just you know, something like music and so on and so forth. The culture for us, it's a space of meanings and well, a space of artifacts and everything we produce in. Okay, yes, the record will be available, I believe, on our site at the site of Higher School of Economics, and of course you can see it there. Okay, and so this is one important point, that the culture for us, it's a very broad term that covers everything, including everything that Professor Simonov just said, the cohesion of society, the different groups, and the new forms of socialization and social life, and so on and so forth. This all concerns, and including, of course, our day-to-day life that we are facing every day. And so this is one starting point that I should say. Then, well, let me show you just one slide here. Okay, here we have the urbanization rate in Russia on this scheme. And as you may see, 100 years ago in 1917, when, by the way, Great October Revolution happened in our country, only 17% of population in Russia lived in cities. And please do not misunderstand me. This doesn't mean that we had all this population lived in huge cities, large cities. It includes also small towns and so on and so forth, but still it's a very important indicator. I would say that large cities are growing faster than an average city in Russia. I would admit that we have two mega cities in Russia. It's Moscow and St. Petersburg, which, well, St. Petersburg is less than 8 million people now. I think it's around 5 million, but still it's a global city with corporations and large different economics and well, all features that are usually attributed to a large city. But well, it's not important by the moment. Back to this picture. I would think, I would suppose that we should distinguish two periods here in the life of Russian megacity. And the first one starting in 1917, and it ends somewhere in 1950s. After the death of Joseph Stalin, who was a leader of the Soviet Union for a long time. And then I would say that there is another period of Russian megalopolis existence. It starts somewhere in the 1950s, and it is lasts until the end of the Soviet Union in 1991. And I would explain why it is important to see these separate periods of life of Russian city. It is also important that during this period in sociology of urban studies, there are different main views and different approaches to studying of the city. And during the first period, I would say the first part of 20th century, the most prominent school in urban studies in sociology was the Chicago School of Economics, of Sociology,
Yes.
of Sociology, with lots of different very interesting researches there which were made by Robert Park and Burgess and Zorbo and other authors. You can search internet for them. And their main idea was that the modern city of their time, consisted of so-called concentric zones. It's from their point of view, it's natural zones like, for instance, the Golden Coast in Chicago. It's a very fancy, very expensive district in Chicago where the bourgeois lived, and with very, very good housing and good apartments there. And together with this Golden Coast in Chicago at that time, there was the slums. There was different ethnic communities like Italian ones and Jewish ones and so on. And the basic idea of this, protagonists of Chicago School was that people naturally settle in some areas where the others that are very similar in social way, they are very, very similar people already settled. Like, for instance, in this district of slums or Golden City, or something like that. But in Russia, we have completely different situation after 1917. Probably we can use this general approach of Chicago School when we are historically studying the cities in the Russian Empire, but not in the Soviet Union, because of different things that happens in 1917. And first of all, when the October Revolution happened and the Bolsheviks come to power, the first steps was nationalization of everything, basically, starting from factories and started from land and so on and so forth. And of course, they nationalized all the private properties, private housing. And their goal was to eliminate class society. They tried to build a new social equal society, and that is why they took this as their first step in the producing new Soviet city. The first step was to requisition the part of all the fancy, very good apartments and housing, and give this housing to working class. And it was the first they do in, I believe, in 1980s. In 1980, 18. And the reason why they did it, actually there are a few reasons for this. First of all, as I said, they tried to equalize Russian society. So they brought workers into such space which is traditionally were taken by bourgeois and aristocrats. Some of these people just stayed there in small rooms. Some of them, they are driven from the country or from the large cities to nowhere, basically, to nowhere without any possessions. It was a tragedy for the whole class in Russia. But if you ask me what was the scale of this process, I would say in Moscow, in one time, I would say it's in a few months, 500,000 workers moved in new apartments in the Central Park in downtown. 500,000 just in one day, literally. And so you can imagine that it was a really massive event. And of course, they came from Russia, from the Moscow suburbs, and in suburbs there was another wave of migration from rural parts of Russia. And so we can see that from 1917 to 1939, the urbanization rate just doubles. And this event that I mentioned is a very important part of this doubling. And so let us see what happens in this fancy housing I'm talking about. Okay. Well, I believe you can see this. Well, this is a new way of living in Soviet reality. Actually, what you can see is a former bourgeois, large, very fancy flat. But it was reorganized, and you can see they built lots of small rooms there. There is a large corridor, and there is a kitchen which is common for all inhabitants. And I believe they had a common bathroom for all people who lived there. And another reason why the Soviet authorities wanted to do this is to control the former leading classes like bourgeois and aristocrats. And they brought all these working class members there just to prevent any kind of opposition and any kind of cohesion in this area. And this is very important for Russian megalopolis, because it lasts, this type of dwelling lasts for decades. And by the way, if you don't know, I would say to you this: Russian President Vladimir Putin was born and raised in this type of apartment in St. Petersburg. So it's his cultural, probably his cultural trait, yes, and background that he has. And probably you can better understand his decisions and everything else just knowing this, that he was living in this environment for decades and for a long time of his life. And yes, the consequences of this was really significant, because there wasn't any opportunity to create local communities. These communal apartments, as we call them, they combine all different people from all classes we know, the intelligentsia, bourgeois, and the working class, and so on and so forth. Probably all these people were living in unified conditions, and they were in the same economic position. But still, the cultural background and their education and so on, they were quite different, and this prevented these groups of people to create real communities, which will be a very important force in political life. And Soviet government tried to help to create these communities in working conditions, somewhere on the factory, in their organizations, because it would be very easy to control this type of social groups and social organizations there. But it's almost impossible to control these groups in the private housing. That is why this were done, and still in some part of our cities, this type of dwellings still exist in the same way. I think it's almost the same we have today. It's not a big part of modern city, I would say, but still it's a historically interesting part. And if you come to Moscow, well, probably you should see some of this. Well, it's
in St. Petersburg.
Yeah, of course, in St. Petersburg. Okay, so this is the first thing I should say about Russian city. And the next picture I would like to show you is just the symbol of the rapid urbanization that happened in the first part of the 20th century. And here on the first plan, you can see the traditional wooden izba, we call it izba. It's a wooden log house that is usually built in a rural environment by peasants, but still, well, this picture symbolizes that the extension of the city that swallows all this little housing and people just moving away and going to this new house blocks that are built for them. And it was a problem for a young and not very young Soviet Republic to build a lot of house blocks. And I think this problem was solved or directly addressed already after the Stalin's death. And here I should show you another picture. Okay. Well, this is another type of dwellings that appeared after, as I said, after Stalin's death, during the era of Nikita Khrushchev. He was a leader of Soviet Union, and these are the new type of so-called mass housing in Soviet Union. These five-store buildings were produced in special factories and then brought to the construction site and assembled there. And the time which is needed to construct one of these houses, it's around 2 months. I think 2 months, and it's already with the final everything, including plumbing, including bathroom equipment, everything. And you can, in 2 months, you can just get into a new apartment. And initially, it was planned that these houses will last for 25 years because they were really bad quality, I would say, bad quality. But in many Russian cities, you can still can see these houses. They still exist, and lots of people are living there because it was a really large program of mass housing. And during this era, during this second epoch of urban development in Soviet Union, well, there was another main ideas in world urban sociology, and I would say that one of the most prominent idea was published in the book by Jane Jacobs, a very prominent urbanist who lived in New York, and she proposed so-called new urbanism in her book. Well, the idea that she is trying to bring into sociological life and into urban life was that we need to encourage local communities to appear and to be stable because they are the fundamental for civil society in democratic states. And it was a problem for Russian cities too, because we didn't have any community there. Russian city was planned from above, and it wasn't something that evolves in logic with these local communities. And but in this housing that you can see on the screen, people already had their own apartments and their own places they can live. They didn't have any rights on them because all these apartments belonged to the Russian government, or Soviet government. But still, it was a very good place to stay. They were separated from all their neighbors. and they can invite other people that are thinking like that, and they were close in cultural way, in maybe they were relatives, friends, and so on. And with these houses, very important thing in Russian culture appeared. It was so-called kitchen talks. Kitchen talks. And so
Yes.
people just were sitting in the kitchen, and they can discuss politics. They can discuss everything they like without any fear that somebody will come and hear, and then they will get into KGB or somewhere. And this was a very important thing, because from this point and from this moment, this civil societies can
Underground
raise.
civil society.
Yes, underground. Yeah, absolutely. Underground civil society can raise in Soviet Union, and you know that in future it will lead to collapse of the country. It wasn't a very pleasant, by the way, event, and lots of people were have trauma, still have trauma because of this. But anyway, this was a thing that brought some kind of freedom to the life of these people. And the bad thing about this ideas of this housing was how they were built on the ground, the plans. Well, Russian government called this type of planning micro districts. But well, it's funny, but to call this micro districts, because lots of people were living there. So one micro district could include, for instance, several hundreds of thousands people. So this is micro in which scale? Maybe it's in the world scale, it's a micro district, but it's not a micro district in the scale of Russian city. And of course, in this environment, it's there wasn't any opportunity of creation of this, communities, not inside of the housing of the apartments, but in the house, block house, or in the block, on the street, on this micro district, and so on. And that is why on this picture you can see it's, by the way, it's a later picture, I think, from 1970s. You cannot see a lot of people on the street, just because there are not very much attractive points on the streets, and people just don't. Well, it's very functional. You can, there are some transportations on the streets, but there is no any ideas or things that you can just reach on this ground. So no sense you can stay there for a long time. No, this is just an empty space. You cannot do anything in there, and this is a problem for this type of communities in Russian city. Okay, and I think that on this mass housing, this mass housing building was the thing that happened in Russia, and it ended with the collapse of Soviet Union. And later on, we moved to another epoch of the modern Russian city, which I would show you. And by the way, I should probably ask my colleague, Dr. Simonova, what do you think? What is happening in modern Russian culture? How do we understand the culture of Russian modern city?
Yes.
Maybe a few words.
Yes.
I think.
Yes. Thank you, Dmitry, for this historical and the sociological analysis. And I think now I should outline the main notions to analyze the culture of Russian megacity on the basis of the Soviet past, and with the instruments of modern sociology, I think. The first one is that the megacities now is the center or the arena for modern or late modern capitalism. I don't know is the capital is in Russia, like in Western countries, but the fact is that is the late modern capitalism, and it means that the cities includes and the city regions includes their material manifestations of the consumer culture. First of all, shopping malls, attractions, and leisure zones, and so on and so on. And the second point is that we can't touch now these questions, but it is the main problem of sociology. It is inequality, certification, and the mega city in Russia now is a so-called dual city. It means that we have the increasing social polarization now between rich and poor, powerful and powerless, and different ethnic groups, racial groups, and religious groupings, and even between genders. And the third point is that we have now in Russian megacity the extreme fragmentation and immaterial and cognitive life. I think maybe it's not so bad, but it is the mood, the frame of megacity. It is postmodern ethos, I think. It is the time of cultural hybrids now. I think so.
Yes.
And this conception is very applicable for the Russian reality, Russian society. And I think the last point is it is not a huge migration, it is a persistent process now, but the last feature, I think it's the megacity in Russia it is a cyber city. It is we have telecommunication revolution now, and the megacity in Russia is the cyberspace, and there is a stratification in this cyberspace, and we have strata in that sense that successful people who based on their cyber capitalism now. And I think that's the main features. If you want to add something for that.
Yeah. Well, I see that we have a new message here. Well, thank you very much for your opinion. A very interesting webinar. Thank you very much. Also, Russia is changing. Do you think that when we can say that this city is a mega city, what are peculiarities when we can say that this is a mega city? Okay. I'll try to react on this in a few moments. Yes, thank you. By the way, thank you for this question. It's very, very interesting and important. Now let me see. Let me show you another picture here. This is what happened in Russian city after the 1991 when the Soviet Union has collapsed. Now it's a symbolic picture because the streets of the city has become this marketplace that I mentioned before, and in literal way. It's a spontaneous marketplace. But this one is I think it's somewhere near Luzhniki Stadium, where the Olympic Stadium. But anyway, in almost all the cities of this mega city are Moscow, and on the almost every street of Moscow you can saw the similar picture of spontaneous trade and so on. But the question is, could this new happenings and new events that happen on the street bring a new cohesion to our society, and could we draw something from this cohesion? And my answer is unfortunately no. Unfortunately no, because this the period of 1990s was a really traumatic period with a lot of crises in Russian cities, and first of all, the disintegration of Soviet Union, and the political crisis in 1993, then a crisis with the election of Russian president, and lots of people well, counted that this election wasn't legitimate. Later on, we had the economic crisis in 1998, and so on and so forth. So people just doesn't think about integration, about collective action, and so on. And probably the rise of new Russian city has begun with the beginning of a new century of the 21st century.
Wild capitalism, maybe.
Yes, and this is a picture that well shows us the wild capitalism in our reality. It is well a part of our biography. Sometimes when I was student, I visited this type of markets, and well, it was an interesting experience. I think nowadays you cannot see this on Russian streets. It's almost impossible to meet. But sometimes they organize something like this. It's very local and very different from what you can see here.
Mm-hmm.
So the next picture here is the coming of this global companies to Moscow. It's one thing that I should probably say to our listener who asked me what's changed in Russian city. And first of all, Russian city has become a global city. So what are the main traits of global city? First of all, of course, these globalized companies that came to Russia, and they are still here. Not only McDonald's, but as you know, McDonaldization is one term that we're using in sociology to illustrate this penetration of international companies in social life, and in this case in the city. So this is just an illustration, but it's illustrate not just this McDonald's and Disney figures, but also the idea of globalization in Russian cities. And we have transnational companies here, and a city, I would say, a new type, here you can see the image of modern city. Those skyscrapers on the back, it's new ones that were built in last, I think, 2 decades, maybe.
Yeah.
It's really new ones. And
too fast, I think.
yes, and this large building in the middle, it's a Soviet one that was brought to life during the Stalin's era. And here is a new symbol that Professor Simonova, yes, Professor Simonova mentioned. It's a cathedral, because we have a comeback of traditional religion in our life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what's the difference between those pictures that I showed you before and this picture? And I would say that the main difference is diversity. Now, we cannot see on these pictures any people here, but I would assure you that we have all kinds of people here. All kinds, lots of migrants, lots of tourists, lots of people who come to Moscow to see what's happening and then stay and live here with pleasure. And so I like this about the modern city. It is really encouraging, inspiring, but on the same time we have new problems here, new problems which are probably the most important is inequality.
Yes.
In a modern city. Mm-hmm. And probably if you come to Moscow and come to our courses in Sociology of Public and Private Sphere or in Russian Culture Studies, we will discuss this further and in a more deeper way, because it's really important problems here. Well, yes, and
to conclude, I just like to say that we can't embrace all the questions here in one webinar, and I must say that Moscow is really mega city. I think it's not so much global city, because their place in global market position of Moscow is questionable, but I think it's megacity because of fast development of suburban areas, and such phenomena like edge cities or cities we call them in Russian Sputniks, or yes, and around the center of the main city of Moscow, we have many areas, and the Moscow is really metropolis. And we have in Moscow all the social strata from the lowest classes to up classes, and in our country we often hear the phrase that Moscow is not Russia. It's
It's a different culture.
it is a different culture, because we think so that it is mega city, no doubt, because it's similar to such walled cities, for example, like Paris,
Yes,
or
absolutely. London, yeah. New
London,
York,
for
yeah.
example. But we have, of course, we have some special city in our some special features. I'm sorry, in Russia. But in Russia, we can observe the similar process, global process, like around the world, and we should base on this process. And welcome to our course, and welcome to our master programs, and we can collaborate and think together and study together the Russian megacities. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.